Okay, good afternoon. This is Dr. David A. Paget. This is the second segment of Urban Geography, Geography 4850 for Monday, May the 10th. And today's topic is urban inequalities. And so we are going to work through a couple of readings. And first, we're going to talk about urban structure, and then we're going to talk about urban structure relative to some of the dynamics of urban systems. So the first reading that you have is this one, and we're going to work through it. And as I work through it, we're going to talk about urban form as it relates to urban dynamics. And then you'll have a writing assignment based upon today's lecture. So cities form according to various patterns. And so urban researchers, urban studies specialists have examined cities and have come up with a few basic patterns for how cities form. And so the first major pattern is called the concentric zone model. And so the concentric zone model has several names. Sometimes it's called the Burgess model. There are other iterations of this model. But in general, as you can see here, the concentric zone model is comprised of several zones. So the first zone is known as the Central Business District. And so I will use Nashville as the example of different areas within the urban model. So here's Nashville, just to get you oriented. Here's Tennessee State University's campus. We go straight east on Jefferson Street. We'll be in Nashville's Central Business District. So the Central Business District in terms of land use is primarily dominated by public space. There's Bicentennial Mall, there's a stadium, there's a Riverfront Park, also commercial space. So there are hotels, there's tourist sites, and also, again, public space in the form of government offices. So Nashville is the capital of Tennessee, and of course, the city has its offices for Nashville, Davidson County in the downtown area also. And so that's pretty typical of most cities. There's this downtown area. Now, traditionally, there's not a lot of residential property in downtown areas, but that's been changing. In Nashville, it changed quite dramatically in the last 20 years. I mean, Nashville went from almost nobody living downtown, maybe a couple thousand people. I don't know how many people live downtown now, a lot more than 2,000. I was one of those 2,000 people. I lived downtown before it was chic. I lived right downtown. It was very quiet on the weekends because all the city employees and the people who worked in the banks and all that would clear out on the weekends. It was very quiet and very affordable. But now it's the opposite of affordable. That has completely changed. So that's our first zone in a descriptive model. And so the next zone is described as a zone of transition. And sometimes, depending upon there are various iterations of this urban model. So zone 2 is sometimes called a zone of transition. Sometimes it's called a light industry zone. So the transition, what are you transitioning from and transitioning to? You're transitioning from largely non-residential to predominantly residential land use. And so if we go back to our map of Nashville, let's see, like I said, Nashville's changed so much. So in Nashville, we can really see zone 2 here. So here we have volunteer welding supply, these kind of light industries in and around the second zone. Some of these, here's wire products, steel company, it might not be exactly light industry. Here's a truck rental. So as you go around the urban core, you see these light industries, United Rentals, or alternative energy products. Notice it's kind of intermingled with the not much residential. A lot of these small industries here. Here's a brick making company, budget car rental, and so on and so forth. So you see still a lot of just these light industries. And I notice it's intermingled with residential here because of the land use change that has occurred. I mean, this area all around here along Jefferson Street was all light industry, but it's now completely dominated by restaurants and residential. So that's the second zone, which is the either light industry zone or what they call a zone of transition. Zone 3 is when we get into our first residential zone. It's called the low income housing zone. Low income housing zone. And so if we go back to Nashville, Nashville almost has a perfect ring of low income housing. So let's start over here on the east side. Let's see if we can find, I can't find it. Let's see, where the Levy? So Sam Levy homes are somewhere over here. It's a large public housing community, and I don't see it. I'm not going to search for it, but it's right. I think that's it right there. I think that's Sam. That's got to be Sam Levy. Yeah, Levy Lane. Oh, Sam Levy homes. Well, actually, this area used to be, well, it still is. It's more of mixed use now. It used to be just a straight up public housing community, but it went through a program called Hope 6. And so I guess while we're at zone 3, I'm going to talk about Hope 6, but let me go around the horn here. So there's Sam Levy. Then of course here you have KC Homes. There's your Section 8 office. So he's got low income residential. Now, anyway, I'll talk about that later. So here's a James A. Casey Homes. Then as we swing around here, we have the Napier, J.C. Napier and Tony Sudacum apartments. And you wonder, well, why do you have these two public housing facilities right next to each other? Well, when public housing was created, it was segregated. So the Sudacum apartments were white and J.C. Napier homes were black. So even public housing was segregated, separating poor whites from poor blacks back in that time. If we keep swinging around, now we get into Edge Hill. And here are the Edge Hill homes here, another large public housing community. And then we swing across here. Then we run into see, where's Charlotte Avenue? It's Jefferson Street. So Charlotte's got to be right. Oh, there's Charlotte. So in Charlotte, we have what used to be the John Henry Hale homes, Joe Johnston, Jackson Courts, public housing, all in here. And then last but not least, we come this way and we get into the Buena Vista community. And then we have, oh my goodness, Cheatham Place, the Cheatham Place apartments. So in case you were following, I mean, I went almost in a perfect circle around the inner core, and you find all of Nashville's public housing. And if you probably noticed that right in the middle of, oh, I forgot about the Preston Taylor homes, or what used to be the Preston Taylor homes. So, as I mentioned earlier, historically, there was a process by which housing was transformed in a lot of cities. And so one of the, let me get into the reading materials. And I'm talking specifically about low-income housing for the time being. So let's shift into some of the reading assignment. And you all probably heard me talk about a program called Urban Renewal last week during my presentation at Stanford University. So anyway, so again, Urban Renewal was a federally sponsored program that had as its goal to get rid of substandard and unhealthy housing. And what happened all over the country, especially in the South, is as the country, the United States, that is, started to become more industrialized, as we started to move away from an agrarian economy, people in this country migrated to cities. So we had that rural to urban migration in the latter part of the 19th century, in the early part of the 20th century, and there were literally tent cities and shanty towns around cities in the South, like Louisville, Nashville, Memphis, all over. A lot of them were African Americans who were no longer interested or able to sustain an agriculturally based lifestyle, and were moving to cities looking for economic opportunities. But again, at that time, there just wasn't enough housing, and people ended up living in shotgun homes and shacks and what have you, with no indoor plumbing, no electricity, no air conditioning, no heat. And so those substandard housing structures fostered all kinds of diseases and pestilences. And we had a relatively high infant mortality rate as a result of, typhoid and mumps and measles and diarrhea and just these diseases that some of them we don't, and polio, some of them we just don't even hear of anymore. And some of them, just for us, say diarrhea is just probably an inconvenience. In the wrong situation without healthy housing, diarrhea is deadly. Millions of children all over the world die of diarrhea because they don't have access to safe housing with safe water. So again, with the urban renewal program, the goal was, let's tear down all this unsafe housing and let's build these public housing, federally funded housing that had indoor plumbing and electricity and all the amenities that some of these shacks didn't have. And so when we start to look philosophically, if we will, you might say, well, these people should have been happy to have had their homes removed and move into the housing projects. And I mentioned this before, and in that presentation I made, that the area in Nashville, we go back to Nashville, all this area down in here, all this in here, all along College Hill where the Capitol is, all down along 2nd Avenue, all this area was a part of town called Black Bottom. And I think Dr. Bobby Lovett, a retired Tennessee State University historian, wrote about extensively about Black Bottom. Of course, all of those homes were razed and people were placed into various public housing communities, which at first sounded like a great thing. We're going to clean up this bad housing. But again, as I mentioned before, I mean, philosophically, we have an attachment. Well, maybe we used to have an attachment to our homes, but especially back then, these people might have built that home with their own hands. Generations of people might have been born in those homes. I mean, people didn't go to the hospital to have babies. They had children. I mean, my grandmother gave birth to my father, my uncle. She gave birth at home. Midwife would come by. I mean, there was no going off to the hospital. So think about how connected to a home that you are if you were born there and your mother was born there in that house, and maybe your family built that house with their own hands and their own sweat. So to you, that was home. And then you had a community, and people didn't move around like they did now. So if you had your home here, maybe your brother had his home next door, your sister lived next door, your mother lived over here, your cousins were across the street. So your community and your family were all right there. I mean, I have cousins in the South. They all live up underneath each other. My grandmother used to live here. My uncle had his house next door, and his children had a house here, house there. I mean, they all live all in very close proximity to each other. So when that community was torn down and people were scattered about, it was a great sense of loss. Even though you might think, man, you should have been glad to get out of that house. It was a mess, but yeah, it was our house. It was ours. We built it. My mama was born in that house. So, well, people, of course, were moved into public housing, and then we started to see the first example of first move towards what we call concentrated poverty. And so these, the articles about urban renewal, that's the first one, and here's the second one. This one was in the Nashville Scene, but it's a really good article about urban renewal in Nashville. You can just get a real sense of how that program was carried out in the city. Then, of course, people were moved into public housing, and there were all kinds of problems with that eventually. So there's some readings in here about the next move was public housing. And so you have a reading on a brief history of public housing. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Oh my God, do we have to read all of this? No, just peruse it. Just get a sense of what the articles are about, and pick out some key points as you write your essay. I'm not saying you have to read this entire thing. This isn't graduate school. When you get to graduate school, oh yeah, they'd say read this, and we're going to talk about it tomorrow. So just get ready. So this paper, this really gives a good treatise on the history of public housing and what happened. So you see public housing started out as a move up out of substandard housing. But when we started to get into the 1970s, and then especially in the 1970s, especially beginning with the Nixon administration, the federal government started to pull money out of public housing and put the greater responsibility for funding public housing on the states. So of course that resulted in a funding shortfall. And soon after, several other dynamics in place with, first heroin and other drugs proliferating low-income urban communities, we just started to see public housing start to really fall into disrepair and become the notoriously bad places to live that we all know about. So in many cases, people are quick to blame people who live in public housing on the conditions for public housing, but the funding was taken away. States couldn't keep up with the funding, And then you just saw these places fall into disrepair and the drugs. And then you wound up with something called concentrated poverty. Okay. And really, to be frank, when you read, I mean, public housing is not meant to be a lifetime living situation. It's not meant to be an intergenerational living situation. But I work in public housing communities often, and you'll find the grandmother, maybe the great grandmother there. Then she's got 4 kids. They're all in the projects. Then all these people have, mostly women, they have children, all of them in the projects. And you're like, wait a minute. This is supposed to be, public housing is supposed to be a place where if you fall on hard times, the government will give you a place to stay until you get yourself on your feet and then you move on to someplace else. It's supposed to be a temporary stop of maybe no more than 2 years. But I know people personally who grew up their entire lives in public housing, right? And had their families grew up their entire lives. And so when you start to have intergenerational concentrated poverty, it creates an entire subculture that, unless you experience it firsthand, if you're a person who grew up middle class and you didn't spend a great amount of time in public housing, I mean, you have no idea. Let me just give you an example. One example. So, speaking of food deserts, I worked in those same Casey homes years ago on a food desert mitigation project. And so we got funding to get buses, 25 cents each buses that only went to the grocery store, because that's the problem. People in public housing don't have cars, don't have transit. Or even if you have transit, it's impossible to efficiently use it to get to the grocery store, right? So I worked with a program, and we had buses that would primarily go to the neighborhood Walmart that used to be on Gallatin Pike. And I'll talk about that super Walmart when we start talking about food deserts. So at first, everything was fine. Then little by little, less and less and less people started using the bus. Now, there was a fee of 25 cents. People have to buy in. You can't just give people stuff, right? You have to make them put something in. You just give people handouts and they'll just keep taking handouts. So they at least had to pay 25 cents to get on the bus. And we thought, well, wow, maybe the 25 cents is too much. Maybe it's putting a strain on folks. Well, what actually happened was, let's say Ashanti wants to go to the grocery store. So Ashanti gets her 25 cents. She gets on the bus. And then here comes Elijah. Elijah has 25 cents too. He gets on the bus. So Ashanti and Elijah get to the grocery store. Ashanti starts shopping for groceries. Elijah doesn't buy anything, right? He's just hanging out, right? So they get back to the public housing community. Ashanti goes home. About 10 minutes later, here comes Elijah. Knock, 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 knock. Hey, Ashanti, saw you got some milk. Can I borrow some? Hey, Ashanti, I see you got some bread. Can I borrow a few slices? So what happened was, there were people who actually were going to the grocery store to buy groceries. There were other people who were getting on the bus to see what other people were buying. And then when they got back, started hitting them up, right? So the people who actually were shopping got tired of it, stopped participating. Now, if you're not from an environment like that, that breeds that kind of desperation, like those of us who started the program, we never saw that coming, right? So we don't understand that kind of desperation where you would actually prey on people, right? I mean, so it's very difficult to understand what kind of environment occurs. And think about it. If you're a child in that environment, and that's all you see. Let me give you another example. Okay, I'm gonna give you a personal anecdote, but it's related to the course material. Right? I'm not just telling you this story. Okay, my girlfriend in college. I only had one girlfriend in college all 3 years, my last 3 years. Turns out she grew up her entire life in the projects in Louisville, West End of Louisville, Iroquois homes, right? Now, I'm from Baltimore, but I was blessed to be relatively middle class. My mother, you know, never went hungry a day, but we weren't rich. I mean, but we weren't poor either. So I met my girlfriend and I went home with her to the Iroquois projects in Louisville, right? I'm from Baltimore. I'm thinking, I'm ready for this. I wasn't ready at all. I was like, oh my God, this is outrageous, right? So we get to her place. Now, she was the youngest of 6. She had 3 older sisters, okay? So I get there. I'm 19 years old. I'm in college. You know how you feel when you're in college. You think, ooh, I'm in college. You're not. You know how you were at first, right? So I get there. I felt like, oh, I'm a come up for this young lady, or should I say, I'm a step up for this young lady. I mean, she's lived her entire life in the bricks, which is another word for the projects, right? So here she has a college man. Her sisters will be impressed that their little sister is coming home. Now, remember, wait. She was the first person from her family to go to college, not graduate, go, right? So I'm thinking they'll be impressed with me because, I'm a college man. So I get there and one of her sisters says, so what's up? What's up? What's up with you? Right? I said, I'm in college. She said, no, what's really up with you? What's up? What you into? What's up? What's up? I'm confused, right? So her other sister said, yeah, what you done did. I'm like, what do you mean what I done did? She said, she said, you know what I mean? My old man, my man, he did a nickel and a deuce. What you done did? I'm like, huh? The other sister said, that ain't nothing. My man did a dime and a deuce. Translation. A nickel and a deuce is 7 years in prison. Nickel, deuce. A dime and a deuce is 15 years in prison. Dime, no, wait. Did I say dime? No, she's a dime and a nickel. Dime, nickel. He did 15 years in prison. So she was saying that my man's better than your man because he's been to prison for more years. Then they said, yeah, what you done did? You done any time? I said, no. What? You ain't never been to jail? You ain't never been to jail? So now I'm like, wait a minute. So in the environment that I'm in right now, going to college is a bad thing because they saw me as being soft. I'm a college boy. They ain't say boy. They said another word I'm not going to use right now. I'm a college boy. You little college boy. How you going to protect our sister out here in these streets? I'm like, what? I was confused. But if that's all, think about what it's like to be a young man growing up in that environment. Think about that. So your manhood is attained not by taking care of your family, getting a job, but by going to jail, doing your time, and you come back now, you an OG. Yeah, there he go, man. He did 10. He did a dime up there. Yo, that's a bad dude. That's how you become a man in that environment. So guess what happened to both her brothers? And so you think, well, how in the world could that kind of mentality persist? Well, if that's all you see, what is it? Somebody said, I was watching a documentary yesterday. If you can see it, you can be it. Well, if all you see is your brother, I'm not talking about your friend. Here's your big brother. He went to prison. Your daddy's in prison. Your cousin, everybody, all you know. And when they go, it's not like, oh my gosh, he's in prison. Oh Lord, oh, it's such a shame. It's like, yeah, he gonna go get his time, and like that's college, right? So over a period of time, it became recognized that by putting people, especially children, in environments where they see no positivity whatsoever, that's how it leads to generational poverty. If your grandmama's in the projects and your mama and all her sisters are in the projects, and you end up with your kids in the project, that's normal, right? If you try to leave and go to college like my girlfriend did, oh, you think you better than us because you going up there to the college, right? It gets completely twisted around, right? The only way she got to college was because her guidance counselor in high school filled out the application for her and forged her mother's signature. Oh, and it gets deeper. So back then, we used to get real financial aid, like $7,000 refunds off one semester for a Pell Grant. So of course, since she came to college with nothing, she got the max Pell Grant. So boom, she gets a refund, $6,000, right? Her mother called her and said, your brother's coming down there to get you. Bring that money home, girl. Like this, forget college. Bring that check home. Bring that 6 stacks. So maybe we didn't say stacks back then. Bring that $6,000. Now remember, she's the baby of the family. She's the youngest. You got your mama, your older brother. Your older brother coming to bring you home with that money. And it's not that they didn't need the money. Think about that mindset. Forget college. We need this money right now. Here she was, 17 years old, 18 years old, on the fence about this. So I said, before you leave, let me just tell you this. I said, you're the youngest of 6, right? I said, how many nieces and nephews do you have? You're the youngest of 6. You're the first in your family to go to college. So how many nieces and nephews do you have? So one of her sisters had 3 kids. Another sister had 4 kids. One had 3 kids. A brother had. So she might have had at that time maybe 8 or 9 nieces and nephews, right? All of them in the projects. I said, if you go home right now with that money, this is around October, maybe late September, going home with that money right now, it's going to be gone by Christmas, and you'll be right back where you started, right back in the projects, no money, no education. I said, but if you stay, think about the impact that you'll have on your nieces and nephews when they see their auntie walk across that stage with a degree as the first person in their family to graduate from college, not just go. Think about how will that affect your nieces and nephews if you stay and you show them, I came out them same projects and I'm going to walk across that stage with my degree, be like me. And so she stayed and she graduated. And I can tell you now, a lot of her little nieces and nephews, they went to college too, because they saw their auntie walk across that stage. But I mean, I'm just trying to get you to understand. I mean, some of you all might be like, yeah, Dr. Padgett, yeah, that's how I grew up. I don't know that. I'm not going to ask you, right? But most of us, for the most part, even at an HBCU, very few, even at a Black college, very few students really come from that very lowest rung of the economic ladder. Now people might claim, yeah, North, I'm from here, I'm from there, and then you go home with them. Everybody wants to be down, right? Because it's cool. It's boring to be middle class. You got 2 parents, you grew up in a nice home. You ever see a movie about a family that had 2 parents and grew up in the suburb? I mean, where's that show? Well, who wants to watch that, right? You want to watch Boys in the Hood, right? Menace to Society with O-Dog. You know, you pay to see that movie. I remember when the Cosby Show came out. Y'all don't remember the Cosby Show, but there was an actor named Bill Cosby. He's the same guy that's in jail now.
We do. We're not that young.
Okay, well, yeah, Nickelodeon or what. Anyway, so what you don't remember is this: when the Cosby Show came out, right? A lot of Black people said it was unrealistic. You got a Black doctor married to a Black lawyer. All their kids, they got 5 kids. They know none of the kids going to jail. None of the children coming home on crack. You know, just people say that's unrealistic for Black folks, right? Unreal. These is like regular, even educated Black folks said the Cosby Show was unrealistic. I mean, so think about that. If you look at the average show about white people on TV, what do you see? Dynasty, right? Rich white folk. Just they put the 1% on TV, 5%. 5% wealthy sector. That's who's Dynasty. Everybody's rich. You watch those soap operas, everybody's rich, loaded, right? The only show they had about poor white people was the Beverly Hillbillies, right? And that was a comedy. You didn't even take that seriously. You know, all their shows, Falcon Crest, rich white folks on TV. We put some upper middle class Black people on TV, and oh no, that's too much. That's, you know, ain't nobody going to jail. Ain't no shooting. Nah, I gotta turn this off, man. I mean, really, that's what happened back in the 80s when they put the Cosby Show. So, oh yeah, the Urkel Show, that too. So, I mean, so when you have concentrated poverty, and see, one thing that my father grew up, you know, in a Black community that was segregated, right? So even though, I don't know if some of y'all watched that movie, The Help, you know, that's what my grandmother did. She was the help, right? She was the help, but yeah. So she was a domestic, but right across the street was a Black lawyer. Right down the street were all my father's teachers lived in the neighborhood, you know, so you never out of school. You know, if you come to school, your teacher lived down the street. Your teacher goes to the same church you do. You know, so you're around, even though my grandmother wasn't necessarily educated, but you live in a community with all these educated people. But then what happens with concentrated poverty and people moving out, nobody you see, I'd say in Casey Homes, I'd say hardly anybody in that community actually goes to any kind of formal employment. So if you grow up and you see people, you know, not going to work every day, you think that's normal. You know, okay, no point in getting a job. You know, ain't nobody else around here got no job, right? So, well, what was the solution? What was one of the solutions to this? Well, we go back into the reading, you know, you'll read about a program called Hope 6. And so what was the Hope 6 program all about? Well, the Hope 6 program was a way of eliminating, it was a federally funded program that had as objective eliminating the concentrated poverty caused by traditional public housing, right? So if you look at right beside Tennessee State University is a place called what used to be the Preston Taylor Homes, right? It was a big public housing community. So what happens is the federal government would come in, they would work with cities, tear down the old, nasty, crime-ridden, drug-ridden public housing and replace it with more of a, you know, more of a mixed income community. Some people would have the option to buy, but you wouldn't have you wouldn't have the bricks. They would get rid of the bricks, right? And I think but see if I should have it. Oh, right here. So let's see if I have, is this the Preston Taylor? I don't think this is it. Yeah, this is it. So here's Preston Taylor. This is what Preston Taylor homes look like. Typical public housing, the bricks, you know. And the old public housing was demolished. And then you wind up with I don't know if you can really see it on Google Maps if we go to where it is now, but certainly it's not. So here's where Preston Taylor homes used to be. So right here, here is that's McKissick Middle School. Here's TSU. There's Rudolph, Hall. There's engineering building, and right, all this over here, all this down here, all this was projects. All this over here, all down here, all of this was a big public housing, bricks, whole nine, like you usually see. Right now, it's these kind of single homes, single lot homes here. And if you've ever driven through there, there are all kinds of, let me see if I can get a street view. Get a street view here. Let's see. Okay, yeah, I can get a street view. So now you have these, you know, pastel colored houses and, you know, kind of a much more aesthetically pleasing environment. So presumably if a child, you know, child, now you've got a yard, you have, some of these people are in a position to buy these homes. You're not just there renting, you know, they put a community center over there. So sounds good. But notice that, but if you notice that the article, the title of this article about the Preston Homes Hope 6 redevelopment is scattered. So what happened was, first of all, let's say if there were 2,000 units in Preston Homes to begin with. After redevelopment, there might have only been 700 units left, right? So now you've got 1,300 units that can't come back. Then even if you were able to come back, you get a credit check. You can't have any felonies on your record. Ooh, there goes a whole lot of more people. And in some of these types of redevelopments, if you're, say, a mother and your son is a felon, he can't even visit. He can't even come hang out, right? He can't even be in the neighborhood or they will evict you. And I mean, it's very easy to get evicted, right? If you break the rules under the new program. So, well, what happened when all of these former public housing residents were removed from these homes while they were rebuilt? Well, a lot of the children got moved to a different school zone. They got moved out to Hermitage, out to Antioch, who knows where. Some of them did. Most of them kind of stayed in the same neighborhood. People got disjointed. And remember what I said about a sense of community? Yes, it was the projects. Yes, you know, it is public housing. Yes, yada, whatever. But it was a neighborhood. It was a community. And so over here, kind of going off script a little bit, but over here, let's see, here is, looking for John Henry Hale. Whoa, I'm way off. Okay, Charlotte Avenue. Okay, here's Charlotte Avenue. All right. Oh, okay, so this has to be. Okay, here's Charlotte. Whoa. Okay, right here. This is the now this used to be John Henry Hale Homes, another Hope 6 development. Let's see if I can get a street view. So here's John Henry Hale Homes, right? Same thing. Tore down old John Henry Hale Homes projects. People got dispersed all over town. I'm going a little bit off script here, but let me see if I can find this. Let's see, come on, I can get it. Okay, see this? Joe Johnston for life, John Henry Hale forever. So this is a Facebook group of people who used to live in these projects. See, that's what they used to look like before Hope 6. So when these people were scattered all over town and taken out of the projects, it's almost like urban renewal all over again. You know, you might think, oh, the public housing is a horrible place to be. I'd say maybe 95% of people who live in public housing are just regular, decent people who just happen to be poor, right? And the way we look at poor people in this country is very different than the way it's looked at in other parts of the world. Like here, if you see people in the projects, you think, oh, you must have done something wrong. You must have messed up your life somehow. What did you do to wind up in there, right? In other parts of the world, if you're poor, it's seen as more you just misfortunate. You know, it's just certain circumstances in life has resulted in you not having any money. Doesn't say anything about your character. Doesn't say anything about whether or not you worked hard. It just is what it is, right? Here, it's like, oh, you know, the projects. What did you? What are you on drugs? Did you get pregnant when you were 14? You know what happened, right? So we kind of look at everybody that's there as being like not good people. Like there's something wrong with them, right? But I'd say 95% of people, if you've really spent time in public housing, are just regular people who just happen to be poor, right? Happen to be poor, right? And so a lot of the problems that happen in public housing are caused by people who do not live there, right? I mean, that's, you know, it's caused by people who come in the community, shoot up, sell drugs, do whatever. They don't live there, right? A lot of people in these communities are terrorized by people who come in from the outside and engage in all kinds of vice and bad things. So there's a sense of community there. So that even after the John Henry Hale homes was torn down, and Joe Johnston is still pretty much there intact. People missed their friends, they missed their family. People got scattered all over the place, right? And so they still come together. They have, you know, they keep up with each other through social media. Here's somebody who apparently needs prayer and you know, things, you know, so these people just stick together, right? So you really can't recreate a community. You really can't recreate a neighborhood. You can take all the bricks away and put up some nice, pretty houses, but it's the people that make the community, not the buildings, okay? So when these communities were eviscerated by Hope 6, and then not everybody could come back, you know, it kind of left a bad taste in some people's mouths, right? And then what's worse is a lot of the children that got displaced away from the projects, what they got was what are called Section 8 vouchers. And so Section 8 vouchers essentially subsidized housing. So let's say you get a Section 8 voucher, you get your house, the projects get torn down, and now you have a voucher to go out to a landlord who is participating in the Section 8 program. So he or she is subsidized and a large part of your rent is paid. You still have to maybe pay $40 a month, $30 a month, $50 a month, but the majority of it comes from the federal government. And there's an incentive for the landlord to do so. You know, there's all kinds of incentives to give low-income people a place to stay. Which brings us to something else. So the Section 8 voucher is another way of getting rid of concentrated poverty. Man, do I even have enough time to talk about? Okay, so when the idea of subsidized housing came about, most of the subsidized housing was put right next door to stable middle income Black communities. Now, not taking anything away from anybody, but the original subsidized housing structure was such that an entire apartment complex would be Section 8, right? Everybody living there is on Section 8, everybody, which recreates another, not really a public housing, but you still kind of have the same situation, right? So it was easy for somebody to become a slumlord and basically terrorize these people. I mean, because you had the same set of draconian rules for people living in subsidized housing. They're seeing the same thing. They're not seeing anything new. So in the reading, you know, there was this recognition that, wait a minute, you put these unstable communities right next door to stable Black communities. What's going to happen to the Black community that's stable? What's going to happen to these people who probably have single family homes that they are buying? And you put this 300, 400, 500 unit Section 8 apartment building right down the street. It's going to bring down those home values. There's definitely going to be some more crime. Who knows what's going to happen, right? I mean, I saw this firsthand growing up, firsthand. I don't have enough time to get into the story. So, well, what happened? Well, the response was something, let me see, where is this? Keep going. The response was the Gautreaux lawsuit. Man, I don't have time. Let me just break it down in simple terms. This lawsuit basically said that low-income housing got to be equally distributed everywhere. Beverly Hills, Brentwood's a kind of bougie part of Nashville. Bellmead, everybody gets low-income housing. Can't just put it next to Black people, right? This is a very, very famous lawsuit, and it was successful. So with the Gautreaux lawsuit, even in places like Malibu, California, there's subsidized housing. You know, you can't just keep putting it next to Black people and bringing us down. Everybody got to get some of this low-income Section 8 housing. So that was the first iteration in resolving this concentrated poverty issue. The second iteration was that landlords should be allowed to only set aside a portion of their housing as subsidized, not have an entire complex be all Section 8, maybe 20%, maybe 25%. So the fear was that, okay, if people in my apartment complex find out that 20% of the people living in here are on Section 8, they're all going to move out. They're going to bring down the quality of the community. But the study showed that wasn't true. Not at all. In fact, studies showed that people couldn't even tell who was on Section 8 and who wasn't. If you just looked at them, they have a big 8 on their forehead, right? But the best part of it is that the children, even though they were low income and were on Section 8, when they lived in these mixed income communities, the children did better in school. because they had a different environment. They had a different set of friends to choose from. You know, if you live in all Section 8, maybe all your friends are down, you know, right? But if you live in a mixed income community, maybe your friend Scott down here, maybe he wants to be an astronaut. Maybe he doesn't want to join the gang. Maybe there are no gangs, right? Or Sarah down here, you know, maybe she wants to go to college. Maybe she isn't trying to have a baby at 14, like all your girls in your other neighborhood. You know, this one get pregnant, and, oh, I'm gonna get pregnant too. Me 3. Let's all have our babies together. That happens, people. You know, so there were many efforts put in place. There are many efforts put in place to deal with bringing Zone 3 out of where it is, but it's difficult. So let's go back to the map here. Here we are, zoom back out to Tennessee State University. So you might be wondering, well, somebody always asks me this, well, Dr. Padgett, where is TSU? TSU is in Zone 3. Now, for the most part, the communities, mostly around Zone 3, except for this area. This is College Hill. This is an area that hill across from Rudolph. You can look up on that hill and see all those big houses. Now that area is a little different. You know, there's some little old black money Nashville's up there, but the rest of the place is relatively low income. If you look at a map of income by census tract or block group, I'd say maybe now average income around Tennessee State University is maybe $10,000, $12,000 per year. A lot of the homes that you see, because people weren't assertive or aggressive with protecting zoning or even covenants, a lot of the homes you see, you think those are big homes with one family living in them. Those are a lot of times rooming houses. So it's a big house that the owner's allowed to segment off into rooms. So you got maybe 10 people in there in different rooms in the house. Maybe they share the kitchen, right? And I know a person that owns one of those homes. Well, I know a person that owns an apartment in the neighborhood, and it's not uncommon for her to have 6 tenants in 1 year, 5 tenants in 1 year. You heard what I said. So what do you mean 6 tenants in 1 year? Okay, January, somebody pays first month's rent. They can't make the second month. They're out, evicted. Clean up the place. February, here comes somebody else. They make February's rent, March rent. Oh, oops, can't make April's rent. They're out, right? So, and then and on and on. So it's a very unstable housing market, almost entirely renters, very few homeowners, except on College Hill. The rest of it is largely renters. Now, we know that that's changing, but for the most part, it's still, you know, that typical Zone 3 low-income residential. So despite of efforts like Section 8, in spite of efforts like Hope 6. Now, one thing I will say, Nashville was one of the most successful Hope 6 cities in the United States. A lot of cities got their federal money, never built anything. Tore down the projects, vacant lot, never built anything, right? Nashville was one of the most, if not the most successful city with Hope 6. And like I said, it has mixed reviews. What's happening right now is so Hope 6 is gone, you know, largely because some of the issues. Hope 6 is no longer around. So a lot of states are using federal money to engage in different types of similar projects. So right now we have Envision KC. So Envision KC is sort of a Hope 6-esque plan, except the objective is that we learn from what happened with Hope 6. So in the case of Envision KC, nobody's getting displaced. This place, there's supposedly a 1-to-1 replacement of people. So nobody's going to get scattered around. But the people in the community really didn't have a lot of input. So for instance, the new apartments, the largest new apartment has 3 bedrooms. Right now, the old Casey homes, some of those apartments have 5 and 6 bedrooms. Think about it. Some of these families are families of 5 and 6 and 7 and 8. But because their voices weren't heard by the people with Envision Casey, you get the largest apartment being 3 bedrooms. And there's a lot of other issues. I could go on all day. I mean, if you really look at it, let me show you where Casey Homes is. Now, here's Nissan Stadium. There's Casey Homes, right? I mean, look at where it is. It's on top of a hill. You can look out over the river. You know, you can see over if Casey Homes was a vacant area, this would be prime real estate. It's close to downtown. Easy access to all the amenities of downtown. It's a pretty green area, lots of trees. You've got a golf course over here, big old Shelby Bottoms Park. You can go biking. It's just this would be prime real estate, but oops, it's a big housing project there. So a lot of people see Envision Casey as somewhat of a conspiracy to get those poor people out of there, move in these homeowners and wealthier people, and they will dominate. They mean the wealthier people will dominate the conversation about what happens in the community. Because for the most part, after this thing is finished, the former public housing residents will be in the minority. You'll have a majority of people who are middle income and high income. What do you think is going to happen then? You know, there's probably going to be a separate set of, when communities like this have developed, they're not all one housing housing group. You know, they're usually separate. So you have the upper end, they have their own homeowners association, HOA, right? They got their own thing. Then you have the poor people who have a separate thing. So there's not this there's no working together. And so oftentimes the people who are the owners or who are the market rate renters will make up rules to maintain and surveil the poor people. They'll say things like, well, y'all can't just be loitering out here. I'm not making this up. They'll say the people who are in subsidized housing and in public housing, they can't sit out on their own front porch. I'm not making this up. This actually happens. And if we see Pookie and them around here, I know Miss Jenkins, she's nice, but her grandson Pookie, he can't come around here ever to see his grandmother. We see him, we're gonna call the police. And we're gonna evict Miss Jenkins. We don't want to see, we're gonna evict Miss Jenkins. I'm not making these rules up. These are actual rules in some of these mixed communities after some of these types of decisions are made. So it's just something to think about as we try to get rid of concentrated poverty. So I think it's about time for us to take 5. So we're going to take 5 minutes here, and then we're going to come back and start to move through the rest of the reading assignments. So let's see, what time is it? It's 3. 2. I'm sorry, I was on the East Coast. Sorry, it's 2:20 something. It's 2:22. So let's come back at 2:27. Let's just take 5, and then we'll come back. I'm gonna stop this recording. Yeah, so that'll put us right at about the right amount of time.